Hello everybody, hello, and welcome to the Benelux EIB Pavilion here at COP27. Very nice to see you here, nice to see some new friends that we've been making at COP27, and great to have those of you joining us online as well. Very, very welcome to you. We are today, during this session here at COP27, going to be looking at two projects and hearing from many young voices, both from Africa and from Europe, joining us online. And there they are, goodness, just by magic. Great to see you all there. Hi there. So we have at the EIB, the European Investment Bank, which you know probably as one of the banks very ambitious on climate action. We've been talking a lot this week at lots of different panels about what we're doing, what our climate ambition is, what the next initiative is. But today is really more about listening. Listening to citizens, particularly to young people, and trying to work out how, as institutions, we can take on board your views, not just today, but going forward as we frame our approaches on finance, and as we influence governments as well in the way that we can as public institutions. So I'm going to introduce today, through my colleagues who are online, two projects that we've been working on with our partners. One is the EIB Climate Survey, which my colleague Thomas Fronovici there, hi Thomas, who's online there from Luxembourg or Brussels, I'm not quite sure where, is going to run us through. What do people in Europe, the US, China and the UK think about climate change? We'll have a report coming up on Africa in the next few weeks as well, which we'll be sharing. And then we're going to be talking about another piece of work that we've done with Debating Africa and Debating Europe and the EIB supporting, where we talk to 100 young people from Africa and Europe about the threats that they perceive next to them in their homes, in their neighborhoods, as far as climate change, conflict, energy security, food scarcity are concerned. But not just how they feel, but how they want to act. How should we, as financial institutions and public bodies, act? How should we take on board their participation? So we're very happy to have joining us from various parts of the globe some of these young people. I mean, here, I'm going to introduce you to them before we start. We've got Aminatou Bilal, who is from Mauritania, who many of you will know, and I'm happy to see you've got your compatriots here to support you. Thank you for coming. We also have online Dave, who is from Cameroon. Dave, you're there, great. And Dave Miyebi from Cameroon. We also have Joanna Janowicz, who is joining us from Poland. Is that right? Yes. And we also have Daniela Proska, who's joining us from Germany. And we have Yao as well from Portugal. Yao, there you are. Great. And then, as well as this, we have Tanda Malanga, who's joining us from South Africa. She is the editor of Debating Africa, and Axel Muller, who's speaking from Belgium, who is the editor of Debating Europe. So we've got a lot of people, and I almost forgot to say that we also have our colleague Edouard Le Cerf from the BVA Polling Institute, who helped do the climate survey as well. Thomas, I'm going to kick off with you first, and then we're going to look at the Debating Africa, Debating Europe survey. But Thomas, tell us, you founded the climate survey. This is the 5th edition. Tell us what we found out this year that is maybe surprising or interesting in terms of what citizens think about climate change.
Yes, thank you, Sharon. Can you hear me properly?
Yes, we can.
Can you see my screen as well?
Yes, we can as well.
Brilliant. So indeed, it's the fifth edition of our climate survey, so it's a very large opinion poll that we've been running for since 2018, and every year we ask 24 questions to a very large pool of citizens in 30 countries. Questions about awareness about climate change, perception of the issue, what people think about public policies, what are their individual actions or what they plan to do to adapt. So the countries we covered, you just mentioned, the EU, US, China, and the UK. And we asked that to citizens that are aged 15 and over. So we also have quite a lot of young people, which will be, I think, interesting for the discussion today. So I cherry-picked a few questions that we asked, and I will present you with the results. The first one is a question that we ask every year, which is, what are the three biggest challenges that people in your country are currently facing? And here you see the results for the EU, US, and China. And well, without a surprise, now that COVID is a bit back of us, economic and financial issues with the inflation in the EU due to the war in Ukraine, the rising cost of energy. Economic and financial issues are coming first. Cost of living is 30% of the answers, but overall 77% of people will place economic and financial issues as the biggest challenge for their country. But it's quite interesting to see that in the EU, we also have 52% of people placing environmental issues, including climate change, as the second biggest challenge. So even in this period where cost of living and economic issues are so high, there's still a very, very significant concern about environmental issues and climate change. So that's pretty interesting and promising for our action, of course. It's unfortunately not the same in the US. You see that, economic and financial issues are placed exactly at the same level, 77%. The environmental issues are way back with only 33% of people saying this is the major concern. And on the opposite, in China, that's also very promising and reassuring. Environmental issues, including 55% of climate change, but over 70% on environmental issues and climate change. People are placing the issue as the first challenge for their country ahead of economic and financial issues. So that's a very strong positioning for people in China. The second question I've chosen is, we were offering two statements, and we wanted to see how people would agree or disagree with this statement. The first one was about government's action. So governments are too slow in acting against climate change and environmental degradation. Do you agree or disagree with that? And you see that it's fairly homogeneous and very strongly in agreement. Like 87% of Europeans, for example, would say that yes, the government is too slow in acting, and it's a bit less in the US and China, but it's still very high. 74% of Americans, 76% of Chinese are really unhappy, I would say, with the pace that their government is putting in addressing the major issue of climate change and environmental degradation. The second statement, where we wanted people to react, is the following: if we don't drastically reduce our consumption of energy and goods in the coming years, we will be heading for a global catastrophe. So it's a very strong statement really about a global catastrophe if we don't change things. And here again, 84% of Europeans, 88% of Chinese, but still 72% of Americans, so very strong majorities in the three areas are saying this: we're heading to a global catastrophe if we don't change things rapidly. So it's in terms of level of awareness and risk that we are facing with the issue, I think we can be reassured that in all of the three areas people are really concerned. Maybe the third question in here, it's a little bit specific to Europe, but it was an important question, I think, to ask. Because the war in Ukraine has triggered the rise of energy pricing, rise of cost of living, and so it kind of shifts the concerns of people away from COVID and maybe away from climate change, more into the financial and economic issues as we saw. So we ask, do you think that the war in Ukraine and its consequences on the price of oil and gas should make us either accelerate the green transition or slow down the green transition to focus on securing energy availability in the short term? And here you see that while we have a quite reassuring answer, 66%, so two-thirds of Europeans are saying yes, we should actually accelerate the green transition despite this, let's say, hopefully short-term impact on energy prices and cost of living. And because I know that we have here young people from Germany and Poland, I thought to extract also the results for Germany and Poland. You see that Poland, 65% of people saying we should accelerate the green transition, so it's really close to the EU average. But in Germany, and we know how much of a challenge the gas shortage is for Germany, we have a bit less, only 44% of Germans saying that we should accelerate the green transition. So Germany are a little bit more split on the question, and that's related to their specific situation.
That's very interesting, Thomas. Just to say that, as you say, we maybe come back to that point with our young German colleague waiting online to see why she thinks that's the case. Sorry, keep going.
Yeah, I have one more slide, just because we have young people from all over the world online today. I thought I would finish off with a small comparison of the results between people that are under 29 and people above 65, just to try and highlight some contrast, because overall actually the results are rather similar through generations, and that's good news. That the level of concern, for example, can be witnessed in our generation. The will to act is there in our generation, but there are still some contrasts, and so is that to make a small comparison. The first thing is younger people are clearly more in favor of stricter government measures imposing changes in people's behavior. So that's quite interesting. 72% of people under 29 are in favor, 64% of people above 65. So the difference isn't massive, but I thought it was interesting to point out that younger people are asking for stricter government measures, which is maybe not what we could expect, I would say. Good news is, younger people are more optimistic, definitely, than the average population about the ability for their country to succeed in drastically reducing their carbon emissions by the end of the decade. So 42% for younger people versus 34% in the rest of the population. Another point is when we ask people about energy reduction, young people are more in favor of reducing energy consumption of people in businesses, 26% for people under 29 versus 15% for people over 65. So I guess that's not so surprising, but maybe just the first one about stricter government measures being more wished by younger people is a surprise. Now, older people, they are rapidly catching up, actually, in terms of awareness of the concern of climate change and the environmental situation. You see that 61% of them versus only 50% of people below 65, they placed climate change and environmental issues in the top three biggest challenges for their country. So when we ask them, okay, what are the biggest challenges? Actually, people over 65 will very often place climate change at the top. And the last point about people over 65 is, if you look at this one for younger people, they seem more in favor of reducing energy consumption, as you see. But when we ask a very specific question about how much people are ready to reduce the heat at home, well, we see that older people are actually ready to heat their home less to save energy than younger people. 36% of people over 65 said they would accept 19 degrees or less at home, versus only 21%, so that's really 15 points less than people over 65 who would be ready to have such a, let's say, not warm or colder home to save energy. So I think I'll stop there, Sharon, if that's fine with you.
Yes, thank you.
We have all the info just on eib.org/surveys for anybody that wants more details on the data. And of course, I will stay connected if there are any questions.
Thank you very much, Thomas, for that really interesting piece of work. And we'll have some questions in a little while, so if you want to ask questions of Thomas, he'll stay. And just to remind you that we will have the Africa version of this report coming up in the next few weeks. So before we carry on, I forgot to introduce my own EIB colleagues here on the platform. We're very happy, in addition to those joining online, we also have Wouter Meinetsma, who is a climate change expert at the EIB. So spends all his time looking at what is going on as far as climate change is concerned and how we can adapt our policies to respond. We're also very happy to have Yasmine Pagny, who is the head of social policy at the European Investment Bank. So both very pertinent. Maybe I can turn to you, Tanda, from South Africa there. As the editor of the Africa, Debating Africa, and the piece that talked to 50 young Africans as part of this report, it's kind of interesting what Thomas is saying there about, the overall, the first slide that he showed suggested that overall the attitude towards what challenges people perceive as the most threatening among the general population seem to have shifted a bit in favor of economic concerns being more worrying, whereas climate change being less. But the picture that we saw at the survey, the Securing Our Future survey, is actually very different. It seems that young people in Europe and Africa overwhelmingly feel that climate change or its consequences is the biggest threat. But I guess the picture is a little nuanced. Tell us a bit about what you found, and also a little bit about the methodology of the report, Tanda, and then I'll turn to Axel. Just briefly, if you would.
Yes, certainly. It was very nuanced. African participants specifically cited climate as a major concern, but there were some who did not view it as the most immediate challenge. But when we actually looked at the other threats they listed, they were which they thought were more immediate or urgent. These were linked to climate change issues such as food insecurity and severe weather, conflicts caused by resource scarcity. Participants from agriculture-dependent countries such as Ghana and Chad could very clearly draw a closer link between these challenges and climate. They spoke of food scarcity, women in their villages complaining about poor yields, clashes between farmers and herdsmen. The climate crisis is a reality for them, but it manifests in different ways that aren't always immediately clear to be climate change, and I think that's important to note. And Axel will come in and speak more about the methodology and the European perspective, but I think it's important to say that Africans whose countries were experiencing severe weather right now, immediately, we wanted to see less talk and more action because it's already happening to them. They see floods and wildfires, and they want to ensure that it's apparent that though climate change is a living threat for others, it's a reality for them. And any projects that seek to come up with a solution should keep that in mind. But I will pass on to Axel to talk more on the methodology and the European perspective.
Axel, over to you.
Thank you very much, Shirin, and thank you, Tanda. And it is a great delight to be here representing these young voices. I'm very much looking forward to hearing from them later on. And indeed, what Tanda said, less talk, more action, resonates well with what the European young people who participate in our focus group as well said too, though maybe on a little more abstract level. So I would like to point out two things that were maybe not so explicit in the report itself, which of course you can all read, especially those who are joining us on YouTube, take the chance to have a look at the report. But just very briefly, there are two very interesting points in this. One is interconnectedness, and the other one is short-termism. So what does that mean? Interconnectedness has various layers to it. So first of all, that means that all these challenges that were identified, so those were many more than only climate. I think that is important to point out. The project was about the perception of global threats and risks as such. So climate was one out of many, but they all were interlinked. And importantly, climate proved to be at the core of all this. So everyone who was in the European focus groups agreed to climate change being the number one global threat, and to it being the driver of other threats, such as migration, for example, but also energy shortages or supply chain disruptions. And then another layer to this interconnectedness is that, of course, we are speaking here about a global challenge now as well. COP27 is a global summit, so many of the young European participants were keenly aware of this, that while we are talking from a European perspective, we should not stop there. We should not stop thinking there. So this is a global problem that needs a global effort. However, Europe has certainly a special role in this, which is on the one hand that it is a main polluter, and on the other hand it is a strong regulatory power through the European Union and its various bodies, which maybe gives it a very prominent responsibility. And secondly, on the short-termism, I think this was very much pronounced among the European participants, because they criticized a lot that many decision makers do not see much beyond their own noses, if we can put it like this. So there were people saying that politicians only think until the next elections, business people only think until the next quarterly report maybe, but not broadening the perspectives as it would be necessary for this true challenge to everybody that climate change is. So instead, they all vouched across the board for a long-term vision that is needed to kick off tangible and more meaningful actions, actually. So maybe Sharon, back over to you before we can go a little bit deeper into methodology.
Thank you, Axel. And indeed, we will come back to that, both in terms of the role of financial institutions, but also what some of our young participants feel are the solutions on the table to do better in terms of tackling this. Let me ask Aminatu, first of all, you're with us. We're very happy to have you in person here, and you've been participating at the COP in a number of ways. But let me ask you a little bit about your experience in these focus groups. There were a number of focus groups with other young people from all over Africa, actually. What was the feeling in your focus group about the threat of climate change? And tell us a little bit about your own personal situation, Aminatu, because Tanda was telling us there that participants from Africa really felt very keenly that climate change is a reality now, and that maybe influences the sort of sense of urgency for action about it.
Thank you, Shireen. So first of all, I want to thank you for having me here. I was participating in the several debates, the Debate Africa organized with Debates Europe. What emerged in my focus group, mainly we talked about the health crisis, the public health crisis, and also access to energy. And we also talk about the food security issue. And we talk about conflict. So concerning access to public health issue, we know that in Africa we have to tackle the public health, the access to public health. It is big challenges in Africa. For example, we have a good example from Mauritania. During the focus group, I highlighted the fact that Mauritania, this year the president gave 100,000 health insurance to people who are vulnerable. And you know that we are also facing lack of infrastructure for the health, also the health, the health infrastructure in Africa. And you know that many of our health centers are very far from the rural area. Mainly they are all in the big cities. And we also highlighted the neglected tropical disease and malaria, which are also challenges, and we need funding from our government and and other institutions to eradicate those issues. One of my colleagues, Dave, raised the fact that we have arable land, but we don't produce. And this is a big issue also. And you know, Africa is facing malnutrition. This is not normal. We have a lot of arable land. So we need to promote our local productions.
And sorry, just let me say,
Yes.
one of the points that Thanda was making is that these issues are totally interlinked, aren't they? So the health, the food, and climate change particularly. How is climate change part of your everyday life now in the Sahel region?
I am part of the Sahel region, and the Sahel region is facing droughts, rainfalls, extreme rainfalls, and also sometimes lack of rainfalls. So these are leading to these are mainly from the climate change, because of the climate change. And in daily basis, we for example, 2 months ago we faced flooding in Nouakchott, and also in many areas in sub-African regions. And it was a big challenge for us, because we had, for example, people dying because of the flood. We have the supply chain on the food supply chain blocked in some areas, and even in the big cities we couldn't move as we were doing every day, because there were no roads. The roads were blocked because of the flood, and you know, this is affecting our life in our everyday activities.
I'm going to come back to you in a little minute or so. Thank you very much for that very vivid description already of how this is affecting you. Let's maybe cross a continent, if we may, and come to Joanna and Daniela in Poland and Germany. What about, it's interesting, Thomas was telling us a bit about some of the actions, some of the reactions, some of the attitudes in Germany about particularly the clean energy transition. But I wonder whether you feel that young people have a different position on that. And what is your perception sitting in Germany?
First of all, I think that the ongoing energy crisis is a problem for all of us, also young people. So I don't think there's a big difference between older people and young people in that case. And yeah, the problem in Germany is that we relied heavily on gas for heating and as a source of electricity. And most of that gas was imported from Russia because we apparently mistakenly thought that Russia would be a reliable partner and would provide us with the gas that we need. And the war in Ukraine and the EU response to that with all that sanctions that they imposed on Russia led to Russia shutting down the gas pipelines to Germany. So we now have the situation that we might not have enough gas for the winter. And with winter approaching, many people worry about not being able to heat their homes. The problem is not so much the electricity, because we have alternatives for that. For example, nuclear power plants. We have 3 remaining nuclear power plants that are still active in Germany, and they should have been switched off at the end of the year, but now they will be running until at least April next year. And we also have some coal still in the earth, so we can use that for electricity as well. But the problem is the heating, because the majority of households in Germany have gas heating, and they can't just switch to an alternative that easily. So we will still need a lot of gas for that heating, and that's the problem. And I think this will affect everyone, because apparently we all have that gas heating, or at least the majority has, and we will be affected with cold homes if that issue isn't solved.
Joanna, you come from a country in Poland which is traditionally quite dependent on fossil fuels, but I'm interested that you were among those 100 young people, of whom today we're speaking to 5 of you, who do feel nevertheless that this is a challenge that is so huge that we need to have a change of approach. Tell us a little about your perspective, and maybe the perspective of some of your fellow participants in the focus groups.
Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon. So let me start with the statement that we live in times when it's easier and better to be older than younger. Secondary effect on the climate change can include displacement, decline in democracy, and in some cases political instability and conflicts. Nearly 8 million refugees have crossed the Polish border since Russian invasion of Ukraine. This has contributed to the destabilization in the entire region. We're also affected food security that will have a global reach. Between 2008 and 2016, around 22 million of people were forcibly displaced each year due to climate change impacts. Predictions indicates that more than 143 million of people in 3 regions, Sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, and Latin America, will move within their country of origin by 2050. So the situation is actually getting worse. It is nearly 3% of the global population, and this tendency will be constantly growing. Most people displaced or immigrating as a result of climate impact are staying actually within their country of origin, where the accelerating trends of global displacement related to climate change is increasing cross-border movements, particularly where climate change interacts with other elements such as conflicts and violence. However, often the individuals most at risk are not able to relocate. But referring to the principle of humanity and sisterhood or brotherhood, so really mentioned by some political sides, we should not leave anyone behind. So what do we do? Because so far, we do exactly the opposite.
Thank you, Joanna. That's a very powerful statement from you there. I'm going to come back to Zhao and Dave in a moment, but I want to just come first down to our participants here at the COP first. So I'm coming back to you, Dave and Zhao, don't worry. Aminatu, let me just ask you, a little bit to come back on that point that Joanna was making. She was making the point, just in case, because it's very noisy here at the COP, by the way, so I'm just going to help my colleagues here on the stage. She was making the point that climate change is driving the displacement of people, and it is also causing conflict. Give us just a short little idea. Is that happening where you live? Do you see that displacement? Do you see that conflict starting to happen? And do you actually think it is because of climate change?
Absolutely. In our region, I will give an example from the lake, the Mahmouda lake of Mahmouda.
Okay.
It is in Mauritania, and it is between Mauritania and Mali, and we are now facing a displacement from Mali coming to Mauritania because of the impact of the climate change, and because also the lake is reduced now because of those impacts. So it is very accurate. Climate change is causing displacement for many people, whether it is in Europe or in Africa. Even if the landscapes are different, but the fact is climate change is causing displacement. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Zhao and Dave, Zhao, it's clear, isn't it? You come from Southern Europe. I mean, this is not just a reality on the continent of Africa, is it? You've experienced wildfires. What is your perception of this challenge? And let's move in perhaps to what we might be able to do about it. How do you feel things are going? I mean, I guess you've been following COP27 a little bit, but you may know more than we do here about how things are going. But over to you for your perception.
Well, it's very challenging to be from Southern Europe, and as you may know from the previous economic crisis, we've been on the other side of the fence, let's put it that way, in terms of countries in Europe. And we experience a lot of the things that at least the north of Africa experiences. And in that sense, we are, at least in Portugal, this year was one of the driest years since forever, and one of the hottest years. So I would say that at least in Southern Europe, we are experiencing climate change at the moment, and as well as the mayor was mentioning in Germany as well. In terms of what we can do, I don't think individually we can actually do anything. But I do think that there are a lot of civil society organizations that are ready to act, but they miss the funding. I come from a very, let's say, a small city in Portugal, and I work at the local level in a youth organization, and many times we just miss the funding. There's no way that we can access the funding because it is either for bigger organizations or the bureaucracy is so large that we have no way to reach it. So I think improving the connection between local communities and the institutions, I think that's the way to go if we want to tackle these issues.
Thank you, Zhao. We're going to get a reaction from our colleagues from EIB in a moment to that. But Dave, when you and I were talking a couple of days ago, you said to me, I want to talk about solutions. So, what are they, in your view, Dave? I mean, where can we go? How can we do better? Especially those big financial institutions, international organizations who are trying to get it right.
Thank you very much. The first thing I want to say is that Europe has to understand one thing. Europe and Africa, we have a historical relationship, and we are bounded by history and even by nature. Anything that will happen in Africa will affect Europe. Anything that will happen in Europe will affect Africa. We are bound to act together. And I've been listening to speeches at the COP27, and even this morning I was listening to President Macron about some issues that we discussed at the G20 summit. And I'm still saying that Europeans or international organizations have not yet understood what is the problem. I feel for Ukraine. I am deeply compassionate for them. I support them and I'm really encouraging their efforts. But I want to ask myself, so we could have all this funding for a war, and we don't have enough funding to fight against something that will cause the disappearance of humanity? I don't know how to put it. I want to talk about solutions. As I said, I don't like to talk about problems because people of my generations will be there tomorrow to lead, to govern, and to encourage others. I have always said that if we continue talking about big initiatives, we are not going to have good results. I will take an example of the report of the EIB. I think last 3 years, they were looking at the economic growth in certain countries. We discover countries like Ethiopia who have percentages of economic growth with close to 12, 13, but there is malnutrition. There are disasters in these countries. We don't understand. So what are they actually doing? Is it that the efforts that they are putting is for, like we say, window dressing, or they are actually acting on the ground? I thought, and my brother Joseph, who's not there today, has been saying this, that we should develop an approach, and we designed a small approach that we call the DEA approach. That is aimed as acting on the local man, the man in the community, the man in the house, in his day-to-day running of activities. How are we going to act on it? And this DEA approach will focus on the diet, the energy source, and the daily activities of the people. The diet, how do we make to adapt the diet of our people with the current climatic disorder? How do we permit them to have a good and quality energy source without affecting the environment? How do we permit them to gain a revenue or to grow economically also without affecting the environment? I will come back detailing in this DEA approach, and you will see that we have concrete solutions that can easily be attained by any international organization that is willing to support, and willing to support not us in particular, but to support the various small initiatives in each country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dave. Look, there's a lot of challenging ideas there, and maybe I'm going to just come to Wouter and Yasmin to see if we can pick up upon a few of those, and then maybe back to our young people on the panel, and you can indicate to me if you want to come in at some point as well. But look, Zhao talked about the role, that there is clearly a role in his view for these international financial institutions. But I think at the same time, Dave is making the point that we ignore the local approach at our peril. So there is an issue there about how to make sure the community is not just box ticking, but genuinely integrated into what we do. And then I think the other question that maybe I can pick up on from Dave was, how do you ensure that you meet the development needs of local communities, such as accessible, affordable energy without harming the environment? And how do you economically allow a country or a continent like Africa to develop while not harming the environment? So, okay, Wouter, how about you give us an answer to those last two questions as the climate change expert.
Thank you, Shireen. I'll try to do that, but I must say I'm a little bit nervous because I feel almost, after hearing all these stories, that I am failing you a little bit. I've been working for 15 years in the climate change field, and we've not solved the problem yet, and apparently we've also not been listening very well. I want to tell you something to reassure you, but I might not be able to do that. What I can do is I can reflect on some of the things that you've said, and one of them was you said we need less talk and we need more action. But when I listen to you, I have the idea that we should not only talk less, but that we should listen more. Joao, when you tell me that your community doesn't feel heard, Dave, when you tell us that we are not understanding the problem, that means that we haven't listened well enough. So I think that's the first thing we should do. But we should also move towards this solution that you've been hinting at, Shireen. And I think, Axel, when you told us short-termism, that's really where we as MDBs, that's where we should step up. We do long-term investments, we do long-term energy investments that can take care of this energy security, that can prevent countries that we work in from locking themselves in to the use of fossil fuels. So I think that's exactly our role, and that's exactly where we should start. We should, however, not only look at the climate perspective, at the energy perspective. What I've heard a lot from our fellow speakers today is this interconnectedness, not only looking at environment, but also looking at social, looking at energy security. Dave, you mentioned the diet, the energy, the activities. Aminatu, you talked about healthcare, for example. So I feel we need to take a broader perspective on all of this to weave that into the long-term solutions that we should be providing. I don't know if that exactly answers your questions.
That's okay. I think we're looking for open minds rather than easy answers at the moment. So I think we've seen an open mind there, Wouter. That's why you're on the panel today. Yasmin, I think a lot of the things that have been brought up so far about listening, about participation, about community, require a sort of structural, systemic, not just like listening today, but how do we build it in to our approach? So every day, every project, every initiative, includes people, not just for impact, but also for framing it, deciding. So what can we tell people today, and what are your perceptions of what you've heard?
Thank you, Shireen, and it's really a pleasure to be here with you today. I think what has been said by all of you, it's something that we've heard a lot also in the past few days, and what we really need to reflect on. This interconnectedness, the importance of leaving no one behind, but to achieve that, making sure that everyone feels listened, and as Wouter was saying, listening more to make sure that what we design is better adapted. It just reminded me of something that was said a couple of days ago. We all know about the climate tipping points that we will hopefully not reach, although some of them have already. But there are also the social tipping points, and we will reach these social tipping points before we reach the climate ones. And in that sense, it's really important for us as financiers indeed to listen better and make sure that every day, project by project, but also initiative by initiative, we do make sure that what we design is actually designed with the people we are aiming at reaching, but also that during the implementation, everyone is continuously involved. And I think at the EIB, we have already that in mind, but we also know that we can make progress. And I was discussing a bit earlier with Shireen that, for example, we are going to pilot for the first time, hopefully, a community engagement initiative on a water project in Niger, and it's quite exciting for an institution like us to start going into that direction. It's not easy, and we will surely learn, but I think we will learn together with the communities we will engage on, and hopefully this pilot will become the first of a number of similar initiatives. So we are listening more. It's your message and the message for me of this COP, and I hope we can continue in that direction.
Thank you, Yasmin. And we might talk a little bit more in a minute about the work around just transition and adaptation, what that means in practice for communities. But let me maybe come to Daniela, who wants to tell us a little bit of her own experience when she was in Hamburg and how that relates to our conversation. Daniela.
Yes, so we've already talked about extreme weather events, like João told us about the wildfires in Portugal, and as you might know, Germany was also heavily affected by floods last year. So we had a whole region that was basically destroyed by severe floods. And now it's way too warm, so we have like 80 degrees Celsius in mid-November, which is highly unusual. So we will have more of these extreme weather events, and we know that it's connected with CO2 being emitted in the atmosphere. And yesterday I went to Hamburg and I went by train, but I could have also gone by plane and it would have been cheaper. So when I thought about this, I think we're setting the wrong stimuli for common people and people with low income to travel around the country. Because it would have been an inland flight, so short distance. I think from Cologne to Hamburg, it's about maybe 400 kilometers. And if going by plane is cheaper than going by train, something's just not right. And I decided on the train, not only because of environmental concerns, but also because I wouldn't have been able to come back in time. But I think if you even have to think about going by plane or going by train in your own country, and Germany isn't really that big, then I think there's definitely something wrong, and we need to maybe think about alternative forms of transport and funding of environmentally friendly forms of transport, and maybe not funding that polluting forms of transport like going by plane from Cologne to Hamburg. I think that's very concerning.
Absolutely, that's a hugely important point. I mean, Wouter, maybe I can ask you what the EIB is doing about that in terms of transport. It's one of the biggest areas of emissions, as Daniel is saying, and it seems from Thomas's observations and the work that they did at BVA on the climate survey, that if people were given the choice to take public transport, clean transport, they would actually take it, and they would even be willing, in some cases, for the government to step in and make some radical decisions on this.
It's a very good question, Daniela, and something that very strongly resonates with me, because I live in Luxembourg and my family lives in Amsterdam, and the two cities are very close together, but there is no direct train connection, and that really stings. So I either spend a lot of time on the train, and I change stations several times, or I drive. So that's usually what I do because I have a small child, and that's not the way it should be. And that's why we need to invest more in this rail infrastructure that will be there for the longer term, and that should be the preferred option for us. And for that reason, as the EIB, we do not finance any more airport expansions. What we do finance is we finance rail, we finance metros, and we finance things like electric vehicle charging infrastructure that then helps the introduction of electric vehicles onto the market.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that. Now, I'm going to just remind people who've joined us online, and I know that many of the 95 other young people who aren't part of this group today may be online, some of them at least. And those of you who have a question or a comment, feel free to put it in the comments box on YouTube, and we'll try and reflect it back to our panel, both online here and also at COP27. We do have a comment from Carla, just saying, by the way, that these initiatives and these ideas from young people that we're hearing today are a great inspiration, she said. So please, bear that in mind. Continue to inspire. I think we also have from the floor one of the senior fellows from the Europe Africa Foundation. I'm not sure if he is here. He is, excellent. So he is Valinavo Kavagali. Is that good? Good enough. And we'd like you to, I know you've been very involved with a lot of the issues we're talking about, but you're particularly working on climate adaptation. And so that might be a nice moment to invite you to come and just give us a thought about what you've heard, and maybe a sort of response in terms of policy or to some of the issues that young people are talking about here, which I think, I don't know if you agree with me, are very much connected to the whole issue of climate adaptation, which here at the COP27 was meant to be one of the key topics for action. And I wonder if, thank you very much, gentlemen. We're delighted that you managed to join us. Just saying goodbye to some Mauritanian compatriots. Over to you, maybe a few thoughts.
Thank you very much for such a very great opportunity. As indicated, my name is Valinavo Kavagali from Africa Europe Foundation. It is a very great pleasure for us to be joining in this kind of a conversation whereby adaptation becomes the center point for discussion. More importantly, looking at the partnership between the two continents, Africa and Europe, we are also looking at the challenges, the best practices, the needs that has been already identified, and I think that gives us a very great opportunity to say where to from here and what kind of a roadmap do you want to map as we move forward. As it has been identified, one of the key issues that when we talk about adaptation, I think my colleague here did make mention of the issue around infrastructure. It is very important that we start thinking about infrastructure, and this gives us an opportunity as well, not only to think about adaptation, but also mitigation and adaptation balance and core benefits, because this is where the issue of infrastructure becomes very important. When it comes to the youth, there's a very critical point that we need to emphasize. How best do we build learning opportunities, but also projects and programs that will allow the youth to come and exchange information, knowledge, and become advocates for the different work that we need to do for both continents. As Africa Europe Foundation, we are advocating for such kind of great opportunities. More importantly, we also want to ensure that we build a partnership with regard to institutions. Institutional symmetry. We know very well that without research work, policy work, and implementation, we cannot be able to move beyond the negotiation language. We cannot be able to move beyond the policies and all these dialogues that we're having. So the question is, What are some of the key pointers that we need to look at, and what are some of the areas that we need to identify? As the Africa Europe Foundation, we're also advocating for full package of adaptation when we talk about adaptation finance. We're talking about loss and damage issues. We've heard about migration, which are some of the key issues that are linked also to loss and damage, and also extreme events. We know very well that most parts of the communities in the Sahel region right now, they're actually suffering from drought issues, floods, impacts. And this is an issue that we can link very well back to climate services, information being made available for decision-making processes, and also supporting the adaptation planning processes, which both continents need to support. The exciting part is this one. Both continents have decided that they're going to strengthen their partnership. Africa and Europe Summit in February 2022 says that Africa and Europe, they want to work together. Reviving that particular partnership says they'll plan together in terms of how to build adaptation and resilience in the two continents. Moreover, this afternoon we've got a session that will be helping us in terms of understanding and bringing the ministers, which is going to be a high-level segment for ministers, to actually provide information on the new initiative that the Team Europe is building on. So we're also inviting you to our session later this afternoon, which will be emphasizing more on this partnership around building adaptation and resilience in Africa. Thank you very much, and we look forward to your further inputs on this one.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kavagali from the Africa Europe Foundation, with whom, of course, we're working very closely. And thank you for highlighting again one of the key topics of this panel that maybe we can look at a bit more closely. Let me first of all ask if anyone in the audience would like to come in, whether you have a question for any of us here on the stage or online, or whether you just simply like to make a comment about anything that you've heard. If not, I will ask Amina first of all, and then go to the online panel again, to reflect a little bit on what we were just talking about, which is how do we actually ensure that we do hear the voices of the communities, of the young people. Actually, I'm sorry to ask this obvious question, but I want people to hear it. Why does it matter? How do we do it? Amina, over to you.
Thank you for this question, which is very essential. The participation of young people and women and all stakeholders are very important. Young people represent more than 70% in Africa, and in some countries in Africa, so in the majority of countries in Africa, women represent also more than 0.5% of the population. So it is important for this group to be included, to be engaged, and to be consulted during implementation of projects, during also project studies and researches, policy, and also implementing policies. So at the local community, it is sometimes very hard to reach those people living in the rural areas.
I'm getting lots of hand gestures from the
So I was saying that it is at the local community, it is very hard to reach those people living in the rural areas. So we need to ensure that people at the local level are also consulted and also engaged. The EIB is doing some great work in several countries, and to ensure that people are very in the loop, we need to engage them at all levels of implementation and also of projects. Thank you.
Thank you, Iminetu. And I will come back to Yasmin and also Wouter if he wants to add something on that in a moment. But I think Joanna has something she wants to add to the discussion. Joanna?
Thank you very much. I just want to add that it is necessary to create cooperation and partnership at a local, national and global levels that involves excluded parties and others, people with disabilities, women and those living in rural areas. International organizations should focus on increasing participations in decision making, as if those groups have often minimal or just little input into the debate about their own future. Let our climate plans be meaningful, not just symbolic. It is also necessary for local and global leaders to make a brave statement on the issue of climate change. This will increase input from stakeholders, including the private sector actually, which is heavily influenced by the political narrative. It will also help us better predict, plan and control the scale and direction of migrations. Let's connect the dots, it's all interconnected. And in the end, I can also add denying climate change means denying science, and sticking to Earth is flat like conspiracy. There's a link between climate change and mass migration that populists are so scared of, yet they deny it. Rather than use the victims of our ignorance as a political tool, we should reach to them and listen to their perspective. There will be no solution without understanding the complexity of this process. We cannot divide our community once again into us and they. Everyone wants a better life, but when empathy ends, it gives a space to the rhetoric of hate. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joanna. Dave, I think you were raising your hand there, or you want to bring a point in there?
Yes, I want to say that I heard the expert, our friend expert here, saying that the EIB doesn't finance the extension of airports and all the like. What I want to make clear is that what's the problem? I don't know if we are saying it like me. We have a problem of tackling the correct initiatives. In transportation, for example, you have countries where we are able, I mean living in Africa, we are able to function only with a perfect railway system. But we still see some countries tabling for financing. You see a highway from Mogadishu to, just an example, to Yaoundé, for example, or I don't know. I believe that we have to look at the difficulties with which those countries, can you get me?
Yes, we're listening.
Okay. We have to look at the difficulties with which those countries are faced in making the priorities, in drawing their priorities. Aminatu was talking about the Sahel. How can you imagine that the Sahel is drowning? Let me use it like that. The Sahel is drowning, but it is thirsty. Because if you look at the cartography of the Saharan region, you discover that it is surrounded by water. Surrounded by water at all levels. But yet we still have some areas in the Sahel region that lack water for irrigation. So I believe that we should look at those small initiatives, those small schemes that will help to impact directly the people, rather than spending much money for big projects. I'll always bring up that point, because for me it is a central topic. even at this COP27, in all the speeches from the organizations, it's coming back small scale financing, because everybody is saying that is the button we have to press. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Okay, I've made a couple of notes here that we're going to come back to some of those points. Zhao, you wanted to come in as well with a point.
Yes, sure. I've been listening to this panel and it's been wonderful, but one thing that I have not listened about is water scarcity and water waste. I'm just going to throw this number around. In Portugal, 25% of the water that is used is wasted in the pipeline transportation. So when we talk about infrastructure, we need to talk about infrastructure in Europe as well, not just in Africa, because infrastructure is essential for everyone. And from these numbers of water waste, we could be serving at least 1 million people with this 25% of water waste. These are numbers from the water management entity in Portugal. So I would like to know what the EIB is doing towards this infrastructure investment.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm going to come back to Wouter and Yasmin, and maybe pick up on three of the points that have been raised. I mean, one is just a very concrete one about going back to the community participation that Amina too was saying, which is like, I think you put it that it needs to be at every stage of the process, at every project, every initiative, at the beginning, at the middle, at the end. Okay, so how can we actually do this? Bearing in mind that a lot of the projects or of the financing that big banks like the European Investment Bank do are through maybe big companies, regional banks. You're not directly doing the kind of projects that Dave actually wants to see us do more of. How do you ensure, Yasmin, maybe I'm going to throw this to you, how do you ensure that you have the participation of the community, or at least the consultation and, as Amina too puts it, the engagement?
Yeah, so
hold on, we need to have sound. Yep. Okay.
Yes, so indeed, at the EIB, we are not the ones who are frontline with the communities. We do that through our clients, who can be private sector or public sector clients, but what we do have is some environmental and social standards, and one is the stakeholder engagement standard, through which we ask our clients, and we request actually from our clients, to engage with the communities who are affected by projects, and we actually ask for meaningful engagement rather than simply an engagement, because we feel this is indeed really key to having projects that are sustainable and that really target the needs of the beneficiaries of the projects. I think this is for the project part, but when we also design new policies, we then, as EIB, engage also with the civil society and other actors to make sure that our policies are also fit for purpose. And maybe I can give the example of the just transition outside the EU work that we are doing, because the EIB is already engaged in supporting a just transition in Europe, but it's important that we do that also globally. And we are currently at a stage of reflecting how this approach could look like, and in the coming months we will, once we have ideas a bit more refined, we will definitely continue the engagement with external stakeholders and groups like you potentially as well, to make sure that at the design stage what we think of makes sense, and then actually go and test it and get some feedback on the approach, and and like this continuously improve on the policies that we implement.
And I guess the challenge, Yasmin, is that it has to go beyond a box-ticking exercise to, as you put it, a meaningful engagement. Before I ask Wouter, what do you mean by a meaningful engagement? What does that actually mean?
Well, meaningful engagement is indeed not just ticking a box we have presented or we have put up a poster saying that we are going to have this project implemented. It's making sure that all the relevant stakeholders have been identified and that they have had access to the information, which relates also to what Joao was saying earlier, but also that the feedback and the input that has been received has been really integrated in the next steps of a project.
Thank you. Now, we heard Yasmin say there that maybe this new exercise the EIB is now about to embark on around the just transition could actually include groups like Debating Europe, Debating Africa, young people's networks. So let's see if we can actually make that happen. Wouter, I want you to come back, if you would, both to Yao and to Dave's points, which are, I mean, I know we've just heard that in many ways the EIB is in the business of larger infrastructure projects. Actually, Yao's question is specifically about the water aspect of that. But Dave is making the very important point that is there not room for smaller impact projects that are really felt by the man and the woman in the street, on the field, wherever it is, and that maybe we should not just be always focusing on the large infrastructure projects.
Yes, I can say something about that. Do you mind if I also pick up on the other part of Joao's question about the water investments?
No, I'd like you to. Yes, okay. Please do.
Because we are the EU Climate Bank, but I think that doesn't really necessarily cover all the activities that we do. So we have a climate action and environmental sustainability target, but we also do a lot of things related to education, to healthcare, to waste treatment, but also to water, Joao. And when we are thinking about financing a project that requires a lot of water, the first thing we do is we talk to our client and we discuss how much water are you going to use for your project. Will this water be available in the future? And are you not taking water away from other stakeholders in the region? Are you not making them more vulnerable to climate change? So we always look at the risks of climate change to our own projects, but we also make sure that our projects don't increase the risks and the vulnerabilities of the communities in which we finance our projects. So that's one thing that we look at. And Dave, you started off your point by mentioning my example of the airports, and that's a very easy example for us. Those we don't finance, but there's a lot of projects that are in between, and there we need to do a lot more work to really make sure that the project fits in the national context, that the project is resilient, that the project is not only good over the next 10 years, but over the next 50 years, that the project doesn't lock in other high-emitting activities, for example. So there our analysis is much more complicated. On the small and medium enterprises, roughly 1/3 of what we do goes through other financial institutions. So we give money to a bank, and the bank then needs to invest that for us. We have strict requirements on what that money can be used for. And there are a lot of things that they are not allowed to do with that money. But what we also ask these financial institutions is, do you yourself have a plan to deal with climate change? How do you talk to your stakeholders? So it's not only how we talk to our stakeholders, but it's what we ask the banks that we work with on how they engage with their stakeholders. And they are then responsible for financing these smaller projects, but making sure that these projects also fit, that they are future-proof, and that they don't damage other sustainability aspects.
Thank you, Wouter. Thank you so much. Look, we're getting to near the end of our panel here, I want to just sort of widen out the debate for the last 8 minutes or so, or 5 minutes or so, just to reflect about what's happening here at COP27. We have a group of people here who range from people from Cameroon, Mauritania, Poland, Germany, Belgium, Portugal, and we want to hear from you, South Africa, Tanda as well. What do you want to see coming out of COP27? I just want to give you a minute each, really quite a short little snippet, because I'll also invite Thomas to give his view, and also Edouard. Sorry we haven't come back to you, but Edouard, you carried out the EIB Climate Survey, so we're going to give you at least we can hear the sound of your voice at one point. What would you like to see most of all coming out of COP27? Just in a minute. I'm going to kick off first of all with Daniela from Germany. Sorry, Daniela, to drop it on you, but over to you.
No worries. I really hope that we'll see some results regarding stopping climate change and maybe getting back on track with the 1.5 degrees goal that we had in Paris, and where we probably won't meet our goals, but I really hope that that there will be some results that common people can see that something's being done, that there's not just discussions going on, but that there will be implementations, and that there will be results that will benefit us all in the end. I really hope that that will be the case.
Thank you, Daniela. Joanna.
From my perspective, I would expect more vivid actions. There is potential in cooperation between Europe and Africa, and as Dave mentioned already, it is our common future. There's no division about us and others. So I would expect something on the level between two continents. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanna. Axel, can I ask you, what would be your number one wish from COP27?
Well, I would actually, if you allow me, make 2 points. The first one is that I think building on what Daniela said, it would be nice if we had some sort of Paris Agreement 2.0, because it's so many things have happened since, and it is time to put all this to real action and to move beyond only the talking, but actually doing something. And the second point on which I am slightly more optimistic, I must say, is continuing what we are doing here just now, so talking with people instead of just talking about people, because we shouldn't forget that all of you who are in the room, as well as those here in the virtual room, we are well-educated people. We have the means and the opportunities to speak here, but there are many more people, and Joanna was talking about that earlier. So we should start getting all on board, all behind this course, and then I'm optimistic that we can do this.
Thank you, Axel. Tanda, what about you?
Joanna spoke about empathy as a tool for change earlier today, and I couldn't agree with her more. I think the more we capture our citizen voices, we get nuanced perspectives on global issues, because although they are shared, they are felt very much differently based on one's proximity to the challenge. And I think just as a journalist, it's been such a pleasure to help highlight citizen voices, to help change narratives, but also to force us all to know how to downplay the situation faced by a lot of frontline communities. So let's keep talking to the youth, and let's also start to see them as an asset, because they are not just speaking up for themselves, they're also advocating for their communities.
Thank you. Edouard from BVA. you as an individual, not as the head of the BVA polling, what would you like to see coming out of COP?
Well, one first thing is that I see through this panel that all the energy that is needed here, it has to be listened, it has to be heard, but obviously there is something where my wish would be that, we see through polls that the consciousness has progressed in such an enormous way. But there's still a gap, nevertheless, between consciousness and action. And you are here to say how important it is to go to action for governments for forever. Thomas presented a question that I think is really straightforward, saying everyone, and especially younger, think that governments are not acting at the right level, or maybe not as much as they should. The second thing, maybe on a more personal note, most of the vocabulary linked to climate change is negative. It's a crisis, we know that. It's diminishing constraints, etc. Maybe we should also think of adding some positive vocabulary to what we are saying and what we are trying to foster. Positive, improving tomorrow, improving today, making it better. Maybe that's one thing. it's a wish that I would have, that maybe changing the vocabulary would also help people to understand that it's for better, not just for constraints and for harder conditions. That's
yes,
it.
Very nice. Thank you so much for that point. Xiao, over to you. Briefly, what do we need from COP27?
Real action, real commitment from countries, and let's, as Edward was saying, let's move on and think positive and start doing things, and that's it.
Thank you. Going to go to Thomas next and then to Dave. So Thomas?
Yeah, thank you, Sherry. Maybe just, I'm expecting things at two levels, I would say. One is more solidarity at global level. We have a lot of pledges at national level, but we know that we need to address this collectively. So it's not that we want a pledge at global level, but we want true solidarity from countries that are able to help other countries to commit to that very clearly. I mean, that's my personal hope. And then at European level, I have another hope, because with Edward we've been studying opinion for 5 years now, and one thing that comes out of these opinions is that citizens are really ready to make a strong effort. They are asking for stricter government measures. Study after study, we really feel, okay, that's a feeling from the opinion group, that citizens are ready to do more than what their governments think they are ready to do. So I'm hoping that, government will not be fearful to take strong decisions to go to a brighter future, because they think citizens wouldn't be ready to lose comfort or purchasing power. I think that's something that we all hope for.
Thank you. Dave, what do you want to see here at COP27?
Okay, my wish for this COP27 is that we should finance more initiatives. We finance the quality initiatives and projects, and let us act all together to save the planet. That's all I can say. Thank you.
Hear, hear. Thank you very much. And to finish off, Yasmin, as head of social policy at the EIB, or as Yasmin, simply, what would you like to see from COP27?
Well, I think I'd like to see that, people putting at the core of this fight against climate change. I think this is what I would like to see going forwards. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Wouter?
I'm a climate change specialist, so I naturally look at climate, but when there's one thing I've learned is that we need to listen to the survey, we need to listen to Tanda, and we need to look at these other elements also. So when we engage with a counterparty on climate, we should broaden the dialogue. We should also look at other topics like the environment, like health, like equality, these kind of things. And not only the topics, but also the form that was mentioned. We should make sure that we talk to the right stakeholders when we have this discussion with our counterparties.
Broaden our minds, widen our focus. Amina too from Mauritania, I'm going to give you the last word. What would you like to see here at COP27? There's a few days yet left.
I wish to see bold decision from polluters and emitters, and in overall from all countries to take bold decision for concrete action to be implemented for loss and damage, climate finance, and empowering the local communities. It is important. I will finish by quoting Wangari Maathai, who is African Nobel Prize, the first African Nobel Prize. She said that you cannot protect the environment unless you empower people, you inform them, and you help them understand that these resources are their own and they must protect them. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you so much to all of you who've taken part in this panel. This has been my favorite of the first of these 2 weeks. I want to say that I think those who've been viewing online, they've been sending a few messages, are very inspired by your energy and your ideas. We at the EIB do promise that this is not a box-ticking exercise, as we said earlier. This is part of a conversation. We've made a network of 100 young people in Europe and Africa, and we do intend to keep talking, keep involving you in debates, in events, listening to your ideas. Yasmin had an idea already about involving you in the just transition approach discussions. But thank you so much, Daniela, Joanna, Axel, Tanda, Edouard, Yao, Dave, and Thomas, and here, Aminatu, and also to Wouter and Yasmin for coming and listening above all, as well as sharing your views. And to those of you who've joined us online, do remember that you can see a replay of this session, which we'll be publishing soon. You can also find the EIB Climate Survey on the EIB's website and also on the event page. And you'll find the full report, which we launched today, which is called Securing Our Future, 100 African and European Voices on the Key Challenges Facing Us today. So thank you very much. Thank you to Debating Europe and Debating Africa as well for your great cooperation. And on to the next one, and may we succeed and work together at COP. We definitely have a shared mission that goes beyond today. Thank you very much, all of you.
Thank you, Shireen.